I was not really raised in a Christian or a church-going family, but I remember that my mom would make efforts every once in a while of taking us kids to church. I remember at the time just like wondering, why is she doing this? And why would anybody be here that didn't have to be here, because it was so boring. So church would have just had a negative sense to me. And the church I remember that she took us to was a denominational church that I don't really ever remember the gospel being given out in real power.
I grew up in a family of 7. It's my mom and dad, and I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And we were a church-going family. We were in church pretty much whenever the doors opened. There was Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday. I belonged to all the clubs the church had to offer.
My mom and dad were very loving, very accepting. However, my dad was an alcoholic and drank every day, very high functioning, very loving man, great personality. I've described him before as the best drinking buddy I ever had. There really wasn't much rules growing up, and when I became a teenager, I just did whatever I wanted to do.
We were in church whenever the doors were open, but if you were to have looked inside of our family life, you would not have known that. My father was a very unloving, unkind, hard. He never said he loved us kids. He never showed it. He was just hard, and a lot of friction and tenseness in the family. And I even remember when we would get off the school bus, sometimes we'd play at the top of the driveway from the bus because we didn't want to go in the house because you could hear them fighting. So I just grew up not thinking much of church. What the Bible said just did not fit with my home life, and so it just didn't fit with me. I just didn't want anything to do with church. Christianity became a set of do's and don'ts. You know, you didn't smoke, you didn't drink, you didn't cuss, you didn't hang out with people that did.
After high school, after I graduated, I went to work logging in the woods. And when I was about 19, so 1 year out of high school, I was, after work, all of the guys that I worked with, we all worked in the woods. We would all just basically shower, eat, and just go cruising. As I shared with the youth group one time, we used to call it dragging the gut. The gut was in between the A&W and the Arctic Circle in our hometown of Coos Bay. And then this one time, got off work, got ready, and headed for town, went to have my usual meal at the Arctic Circle, a hamburger and fries, and there was a new girl behind the counter. And I can't explain it, I really don't know how, but I instantly knew she was the one. I would have to say, love at first sight.
And I used to think of a way out, and I thought the way out for me would be probably education. So I studied hard in high school, till one day there was this boy that I was introduced to, and we kind of, I wasn't smitten with him right at first, but we started dating. And so Guy and I dated for a while, and then he decided to, he wanted me to meet his mom and dad, and his dad was at sea, but he took me to meet his family for the first time. And it was one of the days in my life that I could look back on as a young girl that just impacted me, because when I walked in the house, there was a different feel to that household. And I could remember his mom, exactly what she was wearing, what she looked like, what she was doing. She was doing laundry in the laundry room. And she put her basket down and she came over and she wrapped her arms around me. And I just wasn't used to that. And she said, "Hi, Vonn. We're just so glad to meet you. Welcome to the family. Come on in." And I was just taken back by this, because the warmth and the love, and But something else that was different about Guy's family was they were heavy drinkers. I was never around that. I was never brought up around alcohol. But coming into this family where on one side, you know, they were kind of this, my family portrayed as worldly, and they were unchurched and kind of into drinking and all this stuff that I was taught was bad. But yet I felt this love and this warmth, and I couldn't hardly connect the two, but it didn't take me long to decide which side of the camp I wanted to be on, because I yearned for that feeling of acceptance and that feeling of love that I didn't get in my church-going family.
And so anyway, I remember when we first started dating, she told me that her family were Christian, really went to church all the time, and I was like, well, that's okay. And so she told me that her dad would ask me if I was a Christian and for me to lie and say I was. And I was like, I'm as Christian as anybody. I was born in the United States.
But before we started dating, I told him that he had to meet my dad, because that was a rule of the house, because one of the rules was we could not date non-Christian boys. So I just told Guy to lie, because I knew all the lingo, and so I just said, oh, just tell him you ask Jesus in your heart and that you're a Christian, and that'll suffice my dad. So Guy said, okay, so he did.
So we started dating, but somewhere along the line, her dad figured out this guy is not a Christian. And so he said that I couldn't date Yvonne unless I went to church. I thought, well, that's okay, that'll blow over, you know. And besides that, I just knew that she was worth going to church for. And so I still remember that first Sunday, a little Southern Baptist church. Frank Putmanshell was the preacher, and gave the gospel and told about being born again. And I left that place a believer, born again.
Guy had accepted Christ shortly before we married. My dad had said we had to go to church in order for him to date me, and so Guy said he would. And during this time when we left the church building, Guy had said, oh, my word, it's true. And I said, what was true? And he said, well, Jesus really was the Son of God. And he had never heard it. And I said, yeah, kind of felt like, well, so what, you know?
It took me a long, long time to get a walk with the Lord right. Many ups and downs where I would make efforts to go to church and get involved in church. But it took a long time to really make a full-out do or die, as I called it before, commitment to Jesus Christ.
But Guy was different from that point on. He never really said much about it because he didn't know what to do about it. But then after we were married, shortly after we were married, he told me, we were on a drive, and he told me that he had decided that he was going to live this Christian life. And I can't even tell you what I said, I wouldn't want to tell you what I said. I was upset because all I thought was he was going to go back the way it was in my home, and that was how our home life was going to become. So I was pretty negative about it, and but Guy never gave up on me.
Part of it, I think, was because of the early influence from Christians, particularly Yvonne's mom and dad, that the churches that was involved in was just so dysfunctional. So early on, after making a commitment to Christ, one of the things I learned was how important a healthy local church is, like ours here at Grace Community Church, for Christ followers, whether they be mature believers or new believers.
He began to go to church, and I didn't go half the time with him, and sometimes I would, and sometimes I wouldn't, but I began to watch him. And we've always had a great relationship, but Guy became, if it was possible, warmer toward me, and he was patient and kind, and I began to see that, and so, you know, I could tell that the Holy Spirit started using that to break down those barriers that I had built up around my heart. And so he talked me into going to a young couple's Bible study, and we'd been attending it for a few weeks. And when I would go, I was pretty antagonistic about things that they would say, because I had such a negative view of what was going on. And I was hoping to persuade Guy, but really Guy began to persuade me by the life that he lived. And I think it was the first time that I really saw Jesus in a person. It was the first time I really equated what the Bible said about God being love, and that if you love God, you're going to love people, and you're going to be kind and show that. I saw it for the first time. And so one evening after this young people's Bible study, everybody had left. It was me and Guy and the pastor, and I began to talk, and Gus Bohart was his name, and he said, "Yvonne, when are you going to take that sword out of your hand and look at the God and the Jesus of the Bible? And you're seeing it all around you, and just open your eyes." And I can't explain what happened, because I didn't go there seeking, but all I did was I laid that sword down and I opened my heart, and the room almost kind of just illuminated. It was so powerful for me that all of that that I'd felt inside, all of a sudden I saw it for what it really was. And just imperfect people trying to live out the Bible in my home. But God showed me that just to look to Him, not to people or to a church. And so I bowed my head that night and I asked the Lord into my life, and my life has never been the same. And through that experience, I wouldn't trade it for anything, because I can forgive anybody, because I learned forgiveness, and I learned how to love the unlovable. And I also learned that it's so important for people to see the gospel and to see Jesus and the God of the Bible lived in our lives, because that's really what people see and what they're going to respond to.
And kind of to finish it off on this day, the older I get, one of the aspects of the gospel, of course, that Christ died for us on Calvary's cross, but the resurrection, the older I get, the more precious that idea that He is alive, He rose from the dead, and He's coming again, and that just as He's alive and rose, that we will experience a resurrection after physical death and get new bodies. So the older I get, the more precious that becomes. And so I'm thankful for my life in Christ, and for the difference it's made, not only for me, but for my loved ones and family.